holy shit, we literally just finished watching Altered States, and now we're going to talk about it.
Do you really wanna William hurt me?
Milo and Milo watch movies. Milo and Milo watch movies.
That's right. For December 12th, 2021, Sunday at 7:46 in the PM, we just got through watching Altered States, and usually we do a lot of pre-prep and figuring shit out what we're going to say before this one, but we figured we would just raw dog this one because this is a very reactionary kind of movie, so... And sorry if this one sucks.
Seems appropriate. Yeah. I mean, wow. I guess that should be the place that we start is, wow.
Just
what?
Walk it. So this is your first time.
So this is my first time ever watching Altered States. And I guess wow, where even to begin, right? So essentially we meet William Hurt, who is a young doctor.
Eddie Jessup. In
a deprivation tank.
Like a floaty tank.
And doing some sort of experiment to try and understand different states of madness. So he's working with patients with schizophrenia.
Right.
And he's trying to understand if their illness is a state of being. Is it a different consciousness, or can it basically be recreated through drugs, right? Like psychedelics. And definitely it sounds like they're doing or using DMT. And
well, at this point, the movie takes place in the 60s when all these doctors were experimenting with acid and psilocybin and DMT and stuff like that.
Timothy Leary talked about as a...
Outside, Joey. Outside.
Timothy Leary talked about as a like peer sort of a thing. And so, he is sort of having these experiments.
So sorry, I just want to say that so he is not using drugs in the tank yet, but he's treating schizophrenia. He's experimenting on his schizophrenia patients with DMT, yada yada yada.
Right.
Then he ends up meeting a Mexican doctor, which sounds like a great band name.
So,
but and then he tells them about the Hinchi Indians and their ritual, their sacred mushroom ritual.
Right.
And then he travels down to Mexico in the midst of a divorce with his wife.
Right. Whom he met when he was a young student, right? This beautiful young redhead who is brilliant and knows that he's sort of crazy. And he talks about how he's always been on this sort of like religious and spiritual quest to understand, like, honestly, death. It sounds like his father had a pretty painful death. He's a doctor. He's trying to understand.
Well, what does she say? She says you're a Faust, like a Faust freak, or what is it?
You're a Faust freak. Yeah. Like you would sell your soul just to understand, like the absolute truth or something.
Do you know the does Faust mean anything to you?
Yeah. So the Faustian bargain is trading your soul to the devil for something. Right. So
cool. I didn't know that.
You are willing to, it's based on a story, right? But like basically you're willing to go to the depths of despair to find something. Right. And so on some level, he's going on this physical quest, right, to try and find what is the meaning of life, essentially. And, finds these native folks, these Hinchi Indians in Mexico, he says, who sort of concoct this potion, I should say, like a brew with a root and some of his blood and some other stuff.
And Amanita muscaria mushrooms.
Yep. And he sort of...
which are legal.
Oh, that's good to know, actually.
In the United States of America.
Those are the like...
fly agaric.
Are those the ones that are the red mushrooms with the little... So those are Super Mario mushrooms?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, awesome.
And you can go to a head shop and buy them.
Oh, that's great to know. Okay, well, shit. I mean,
I don't know if
I wonder-
I don't know if they do.
what this movie said. I know. I was going to say, I
I
don't
don't
know
know
if
if
they
they
do all
do
this, but so essentially he starts tripping, right? And brings this sort of drug tincture back to the States and starts
mixing it with the tank.
yeah, and like experimenting with going to these different levels of consciousness. But what ends up happening is he basically regresses genetically during some of these experiences. And then where it seems to have landed in my brain, although I'm sure we will debate, is it seems as though he goes past primitive anything. He just goes past existence. And
so first he has a physical, so he goes through a aphasia. Help me with these
yep.
because I understand
So
them
first
when they're
he goes through, like,
I understand
he has
them
some
when they're saying
amnesia,
them.
and he goes through this like just hallucinogenic experience, but then he has some physical manifestations
aphasia. Is
Yep.
that the yeah
where he can't speak.
right?
He can write, but he can't speak, and turns out that his
He's like, I need a blood test.
yeah,
I need
blood
an X-ray.
test. Give me an X-ray. We have to check this before I reconstitute.
Yeah, and what I like about this is he's sort of got like the best of both worlds in his colleagues, because he's got like the sort of helpful lab technician type,
Right.
and then he's got
Arthur.
like the turbo skeptic
Mason.
and he
But all are
they're
men
all
of science.
but they're all curious, like
Yes.
like one of like they're I guess that's another thing that I like about this movie, and you don't see this in movies anymore, is like discussion and expression of ideas from multiple points of view. Like Mason is like, no, god damn it, you guys are crazy, but I'm curious, or he presents
Right.
his like,
But he's certainly open to the possibility of something, and they're men of science. So if you can prove it and you can recreate it, then somehow it becomes tangible, which I think also is part of this whole question about, is there a pinpointable absolute truth in life? Is it really what we create? Is it finding love in the infinite and in the void? And like, that's what sort of defines your experience, rather
I think that's
than
the moral, at the
right?
end. And also there's some sick body horror shit going on throughout the middle of this movie. Like body horror is a term that I learned from researching this movie, because
That's interesting.
so body horror is a genre of horror wherein the body
Is
like
used to terrify.
no, like I guess like Kafka, the Metamorphosis would be like a body horror, I guess. You know what I mean?
Would The Fly be a body horror?
Totally. Good call. Oh, you're not even talking into your microphone.
I'm so sorry.
say what you just said again.
I'm so sorry. I had to put the microphone down to attend to a little business of altered states. So we were talking about body horror, and I recognize that The Fly might be like body horror as well, because it's a physical body transformation, and there's something uncontrollable about it, right? Like where your own body is deceiving and betraying you, and
Right.
changing, and
Well, and like so
they had a very scary primitive.
it will so for the first
Gorilla.
entire half of the movie, you've got like, isn't this curious? Isn't this interesting? I'm William Hurt. I'm emotionally detached, but I am obsessed with like God and truth. And it was, well, at one point he talks about like, oh, that's the other thing I wanted to say is like this movie talks about religion in a sort of an honest and innocuous kind of way that would never be like handled this way in motion pictures nowadays.
How so? Like, I don't disagree, but I'm Jewish, so I feel like I often will see something. But like, tell me, what do you see? Because I agree.
So he has this. He's born we're to assume that he's had this curiosity since birth, so he's born with this insatiable thirst for truth and knowledge. And what's the first thing you go to when you want truth is religion, and like the nearest religion to you usually.
Right, and he talks about being incredibly religious.
And he had visions.
Yep, until he was 16
when his dad died. And he realized. So go for it, baby.
No, I was just gonna say that.
Talk it out, baby.
You bring up some excellent points, but when his dad died, he said that the one thing that his father was able to sort of mutter out was terrible, which is kind of horrifying, right? And that's what he says he's plagued with is like, how terrible must this pain be of getting to the end? And, you know, he was like, even a good man like my father was horrified in the end. So where the fuck was God? You know, basically.
So either A, where was God, or B, like the returning to the absolute, or the finding of the ultimate truth is a terrible thing, or something like that,
or getting so
like the getting to the point that he's able to get to at the end of the movie
is supposed to be the horror or the terrible.
Well, that's like when Marlon Brando dies in Apocalypse Now, and he goes, the horror.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, well, I mean, it is interesting, right? And also, I mean, obviously, like the idea of like what it's like to be a 16-year-old and have this idea of immortality completely shattered, and you know, growing up religious,
lost his faith by dinner.
Yes,
he wasn't.
He said he didn't grow up religious.
He didn't grow up religious.
But he had visions growing up, which is also
probably because he just like needed to understand. So it's almost like if you're hip to the question early on, then you can really only have like early on answers until you like figure more shit out. You know what I mean? So he probably was like, oh, there is the question, which is what is the ultimate truth in our existence, in death, in life, in birth, all that stuff.
Right. Right.
So it must be religion, because that's like the quickest and the quickest, and like religion is like the fast food of self-realization. You know, and it's like, tell me what to do. And you know, some people need that shit. Some people just need to like be told to be a good person.
I mean, I guess I get that, and
or to have like an answer in the form of like an animal or a person, or you know, or like some sort of thing like that.
Yes, and also this idea that our fear of the void can be assuaged by, you know, also in some ways thinking like
understanding.
Yeah, and also that there's going to be some sort of like parental figure to like make it okay in the end, right? Rather than being like we're sort of all on our own. And hopefully we can connect to something tangible in that sort of void. Right, which is I think part of what this connection between him and this woman are, right? Because they love each other, but love is something much more than just I love you, which is sort of talked about.
Well, and you know the thing, I love the ending of this movie, even though it is a little confusing, and we'll talk about that. But I love that the whole movie was, I mean, like when you think of science fiction, this is pretty much like science or like fictitious science. You know what I mean?
I'm shocked to hear that it's considered a horror movie.
A horror?
Because, I mean, I guess, I mean,
like
in terms of the...
when his stomach starts going up.
Yeah, no, in terms of the sort of body horror piece you were talking about and the special effects of, certainly when he becomes this more primitive, like ape-like being who's running around the city and... sort of fighting for his own survival. It's kind of scary. And and just sort of watching this humanoid kind of body is kind of scary, and they have him painted like with blue eyes, and that may not even be William Hurt, which is also curious, right?
So I thought about that afterwards, and he did say that they shrank in stature to like 3 to 4, so they probably couldn't find like a
right
monkey enough looking little person, so they probably just got like a short parkour dude to do all the monkey parts.
Probably, yeah, or like a stunt person, yeah. No, 100%. I mean, obviously it wasn't all William Hurt, but that's interesting too, is like obviously that's a separate issue, but the colorism and the, use of sort of like indigenous people
to represent
primitive man, but at the
like
same
pre-man
time, right, and that there's like the Native Americans hold the divine wisdom, but at the same time, like, yes,
I think that's kind of chicken and egg, because that's what that person looks like is kind of what the textbooks were saying at the time was that stage of man. But I see what you're saying. Who knows if the motherfucker who wrote the textbook was like, I hate Mexicans, so I'm going to make the primitive man look like Mexicans and shit.
Or whatever it was. But I think, well, and also, we recognize when the film was made and all of those pieces of things.
Yeah, dinosaurs did not have feathers yet.
That's true. But, dude, and Pluto was definitely still
a planet, yeah.
But it also is like but at the same time, there is a piece of it that is completely connected to like folks who are closer to the earth, who are indigenous, who have the blood of sort of like the earth. Because one of the things that he talks about when people are like, there's no way you're tapping into some sort of ancestral genetic memory.
Right.
And he says that like, well, our brains hold the genetic code of billions of years of evolution, and so every state we've existed in exists in us.
Well, and he says memory is energy, like at some point during that monologue,
right, cannot be created or destroyed, sort of only transferred. And what if we do hold the genetic code, or sort of excuse me, like every piece of evolution that we have gone through, like in some ways is still in our brain. And so if we did light the right neurons, could I all of a sudden climb a tree with incredible dexterity?
Yeah,
or
yeah, totally.
Do you know what I mean? Or like tap into some place where I was like an incredible sprinter or long distance runner, and like, that's
I would
not my like Jewish dumpling Eastern European body.
I would also like to apologize to the people who have gotten used to the caliber of movie that we've been watching. I hadn't seen this movie since like 2008 or so it had been like a hot minute since I saw this, and I remembered it was sort of trippy and fun, like heady a little bit,
right?
But when I rewatched it, I was like, "Oh fuck, this is a great movie,"
I know.
So when I picked out this movie, although Katie, technically it was her pick, but she's busy with other shit, so I suggested this one.
But I was excited. Yes. I've never seen it,
and so we did like House of Wax, Trolls, a bunch of these BS movies. And I swear to God, for some reason, all I could remember of this movie was the monkey shit. And I was like, wouldn't it be funny if we watched the Isolation Tank monkey movie?
Right, like, what a weird movie. That flows with what we're doing. And as it turns out, this is like a totally stellar pick. And
a great movie,
interesting,
a wonderful conversational piece amongst people who like this kind of shit.
I'm curious because obviously it's based on a book you were saying, and there's, obviously real studies that.
So my phone's dead, so just bear with me with all the bad, or you could help fact check me on this shit.
It'd be my pleasure.
So the book, I think, is fiction, but it deals with the real shit that like Timothy Leary and John C. Lilly were doing with isolation tanks and LSD. And so I think he kind of like wrote all that into a book and made it sort of like a fantastical work of science fiction horror.
Yeah.
And then
Patty Chayefsky.
so you'll notice on the back of the movie it says written for the screen by Sidney Aaron, which is a suit. So it says written for the screen by Sidney Aaron from the novel Altered States by Patty Chayefsky. And so Sidney Aaron turns out is a pseudonym for Patty Chayefsky.
Awesome.
Because he and the director Ken Russell clashed because Patty Chayefsky wrote this like totally heady, dialogue driven, visuals driven thing. And so Ken Russell was trying to pull it all into some kind of relatable arc. You know what I mean?
Right.
And then I guess they had like he in the Wikipedia he reads an excerpt from the original script and he's like, what was I supposed to do with that? Like how was I supposed to put that on film? And so I think the visuals, he does a great job representing all of what William Hurt's going through in this movie.
I mean, the visuals were incredible,
especially for the 80s.
I was gonna say, I mean, it was supposed to be, it spanned sort of through the 60s and 70s, but it was filmed in the 80s, like it just
or in the late 70s, because
Right.
it came out in 1980, which is its own little slice of cultural time.
That's interesting. Yeah. Okay. So the graphics I thought were great. The special effects were
so
well used.
So real quick, I just want to finish the thought about the writer. They clashed, and he was like, "Well, don't put my name on. Like, I don't want to say that I wrote what you're making. So just say Sidney Aaron wrote, or you know what I mean?
Okay,
like,
yeah,
so
yeah.
that's all. That was honestly the only research I did for this movie.
That was good research, though.
Other than the fact that this was William Hurt's feature film debut, which what a good actor, and Drew
Barrymore,
little tiny Drew Barrymore is in there 2 or 3 times.
Like, I mean, she must have been like 4
Like 3, yeah.
or something. Yeah, I mean, 1980, William Hurt, Blair Brown, I'm assuming that must have been the woman, right?
Redhead.
Yes, amazing. And then Bob Balaban, who is just,
He's good in everything.
Excellent.
And Charles Hayde, that must have been Mason. I feel like I've seen him.
Charles Hayde was Mason Parrish. Yep.
I feel like I've seen him in other movies where he's like a. No, you're not gonna cross the line, damn it! You know. I'll give you all the rats you can cut up, but that's all I want to be implicated in your little science experiment over here.
Yeah, that was literally what he said. He was like, "You can cut up all the rat brains you want," but then he kept coming back because he wanted to see what was happening.
I love that he. So he's like, fuck you guys, fuck the Henshi Indians. You guys are irresponsible. I'm out of here. I don't want anything to do with this shit. And then you see him working on some other shit, and then he just kind of like looks up, and then you see him. The next time you see him, he's like in the lab with them. He's like, well, somebody had to keep an eye on you two sorcerers.
Right. I mean, which I
love
guess
the language. So here's something that I always lose in period pieces that were made a few years ago wherein their own lingo is being applied.
Sure.
I love the way that Charles Hayde's character talks in this movie, and I was wondering if that was like 80s shit or if that was like 60s, 70s, like late 60s, early 70s shit.
It's a good question.
Like somebody had to keep an eye on you sorcerers.
Right.
You know?
I mean, that's a really great question at all. And interesting how highly academic and how highly academized all of this was. Like,
they definitely didn't
just
dumb it down for the audience.
No, not at all. But also, like, this, I mean, all of it was very, real. But what I meant also was like, these men were fucking tripping balls. Like these were professional, like very highly intelligent, highly academic men who were like tripping balls
Loaded. Yeah, totally.
and loaded. And that's also an interesting thing to think about.
Well,
Just
and that
in
was,
terms of reality.
That part was real.
Yeah,
That
well,
part-
that's, I mean, yeah, and what the ripple effect of medicine and culture are just from that, and thinking about if at the end of the day, the sort of ultimate quest for truth is that there is no absolute truth other than love,
having a good time,
Right.
basically, you know.
then perhaps that's why psychedelics are deemed to be so dangerous. Because isn't that counterintuitive to sort of capitalism and, you know, consumerism, right? Is like trying to claw your way to
some kind of top. Yeah, totally.
Yeah, something more than just
love. I think that right now, and you know, we can debate this as much as we want. I think that capitalism is the best that we can do right now until we all agree to
consciously
just
let it
fucking
go.
let go and relax and love each other and stuff like that.
Right. And have like intentional communities where
Because
we're not just striving for this resource that isn't even real.
Yeah, totally.
Right.
Versus having all that forced on a people who are not ready to let go of XYZ, you know what I mean?
Sure. And this,
I guess we're talking about socialism at that point.
yeah, I mean, I guess so, right? But what's also interesting is if you think about this idea of like altered states, right? The title is states of perception and consciousness. And so part of what we see is like horror, right? So he's in this sort of body transformation. He breaks into a zoo. He kills a goat and eats it. And he
also
says,
whoops on some elephants, like for real.
Yeah, we also
by the way,
there's definitely like real animal abuse in this, which was also an interesting part of like the 80s that just happened. And you know, glad that
do you remember watching Apocalypse Now? Because we didn't see that. We saw that for the first time together.
Yep.
And they butcher that cow or whatever the fuck it is, and I just remember being like, oh, they're gonna cut away right at the last second, and they sink that machete into its neck.
Crazy.
and it's like you know what else has what other movie I would love to watch maybe for this podcast that has shit like that in it is it's like the Rainbow Serpent or something like that. It was a early John Carpenter movie with Bill Pullman, and he gets entangled in some voodoo shit, and apparently some of the voodoo shit, some of the hoodooing and voodooing, the dark arts was like for real. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So almost like that Green Inferno, like the original Green Inferno had some cannibal shit.
The real cannibal Holocaust. Yeah. Yes, these movies were definitely different. And I'm sorry. No, it's just to circle back. What's interesting is that what was perceived by his wife as like the most horrifying thing that could happen, right? He becomes this primitive self, breaks into the zoo, maybe kills somebody, eats a fucking goat live, drinks its blood, he describes as the most ultimately satisfying experience of his life because he had the consciousness that a primitive him had, which was just to survive the night.
A simple truth. It was a simple, understandable truth, and that's what he was craving.
Yeah. It was
I just made that shit up.
Oh my God. That shit was fucking brilliant.
Well, you know, you think about it, like at the beginning of the movie, he talks about how he had it and it was God, and then he lost it when his dad said "horrible," and then and then he said by dinner he had like lost his faith. And so he's trying to get it back, and then when he's a monkey man, he gets like a question, an understandable question, and an understandable answer.
And do you think that wasn't satisfying enough? Because at that point... I think
that was satisfying. I think at that point, he was like, he thought sort of like I was teasing you in the movie. I think that he was only really interested in, or not necessarily interested in, but
dipping his toe in, not.
Well, no, because I don't think they realized that going beyond Weremonkey was Posserus, and so
right.
So I think that when he's like, because remember he's
right,
like,
like he didn't
he's like,
think
let's
that
do it
he
again.
we have to
like,
recreate the experiment.
And he even says like, if I get out of the tank, you'll have to chase me down and sedate me.
Right.
So they're aiming at Monkey when he like zips past and like becomes single cell, and then basically.
Yeah, I mean, essentially, right? So, I mean, what I assumed we were watching as we see him progress or regress, I should say, past primitive human into past single cell organism, past any of that, is it almost looks like the Big Bang. Like there is this gigantic bright collision that knocks everybody out, and then you just have this watery nebulous light source that looks what I would assume to be like what sort of like
the primordial
goop looked like. That was the first thing I thought was interesting, and I didn't realize, because she sort of reaches into it to pull him out, is what I thought. But I think it's that he is the goop, right? He has become
well, I think that's
the primordial soup, and she sort of reaches into the ethos to
I think that
bring
that's
him
when
back
this
to actual consciousness.
I think that's the point at this movie where the movie sort of like asks the audience to like forgive the technical shortcomings.
Well, sure, you can't, yeah.
Because it's so like how do you show somebody, like they could do it now. They could definitely do like an artistic representation of somebody like reaching into the primordial stuff and retrieving somebody who like regressed that far back with her love, and literally pulling him into her bosom and stuff like that, and just like I mean that's sort of where the movie it's sort of like there's you get the body horror shit, the monkey shit. They pull the gang together to do the experiment, and it becomes like way more than anybody
ever expected, because
and there's this huge like explosion of visuals and stuff, and then that's when the movie kind of goes from science to more of like this poetic,
metaphysical.
And I really like the ending, because it's like it's love, like you saved me from being so smart that I retarded myself. You know what I mean?
I get it. I also I felt like part of it was learning to pay attention to what's in front of you rather than looking past it
for some sort of hidden meaning or truth.
Right. Or like it's kind of cheesy, but there's
live in the now.
Yeah, like I mean it's kind of cheesy, but there is this line in Michael Cunningham's The Hours where this woman's talking about a memory of being young on the beach and what a happy day it was, and how at the time she thought, well, this is happiness, this is going to last forever. This must be what it's like to be happy forever. And as like an older woman, she's looking back thinking like, I didn't recognize that that's what was happiness, right? Like that day on the beach that felt so happy. Like, isn't that enough? That doesn't have to sort of be the definitive truth or even the pinpointable experience, right? It's like, can't we recognize that is the meaning, right? Is those moments that become our reality.
I think for some people there's like the idea of an ultimate truth kind of gives you a barometer by which to gauge everything else around you.
Sure.
So like if there's some sort of ultimate truth and other people are acting in opposition of what you think your ultimate truth is, then you got a fucking problem. You know what I mean?
Sure.
But it's a lot scarier initially, but a lot more interesting to sort of like let go of the notion of a center point by which to judge everything else, and just
Absolutely.
sort of like
exist inside of it rather than
it's
be
almost like life is what you
critical.
create it versus what it should be based on this truth that you've either found or you're looking for
yeah.
by way of religion or drugs or
Yeah.
books or wisdom or knowledge or whatever, you know.
Yeah, and I think also that there isn't necessarily one capital T truth, right? Like everybody's sort of truth is going to be a little different, and I think that
Oh my
rather
god,
than,
that's what the fuck I just said. Just kidding.
but I said it even fucking better. I think that like if I'm just in agreement with you, my dearest darling,
Of course.
and
I'm just trying to be funny because
you busting balls.
We're getting all gooped
Goopy
and gagged.
gaggies. Interesting to think about what it would be like to actually invest in the idea of like the one absolute truth is that we are all sort of connected and that somehow there is something that we know motivates us outside of just blood and organs pumping, right? Like
Right.
it doesn't have to necessarily be God, can be whatever, it can be stardust, can be fucking primordial sloop, can be love, can be fucking Satan, right? Like, but it's interesting to recognize that how different energetically everything even would be if we actually existed in a world where like half as many people or even a quarter of many people like allowed their brains to think that something like this was even possible, right? So there was so much free thinking and expansion of knowledge in the 60s and the 70s, and obviously in the United States there was a huge fucking pushback, and we all know like the conservative 80s and Reagan, but imagine how differently evolved we may be if we hadn't necessarily stifled our own expansion.
I think that the conservative 80s and all that stuff, which I think there's a reality to that. Excuse me. I sometimes wonder if the just say no to drugs, the all dare and all that shit.
Right.
I wonder if that was sort of maybe like an unforeseen symptom of like, okay, there's too much expansion and psychedelia going on, so crack. Here's the crack epidemic. You know, the CIA just like dropped a white fucking brick on top of everything, you know?
I mean, and in no way, right? Like,
because I'm sure fucking the Reagans don't know the difference between psychedelics and crack, so they're just like
capital D drugs are all the same, and everybody does
like,
it.
look,
and,
that person is on the drugs,
and by no means are we telling you to take or not take anything.
Yeah, do whatever the fuck you want.
Yeah, we also recognize that, like, I mean, fucking A, like,
we check the not for kids box.
Oh my God,
when we upload
addiction
this.
is much different than, you know, casual psychedelia, or even this idea of controlled, quote unquote, experiments to see if there was actual neurological evidence of change,
right?
Which is so fascinating because
Not
that's
like
what's
monkey
happening. No, I mean, like, obviously in terms of like the genetic piece, like that's not what we're studying now, but in terms
Like
of
people
like what
quitting
people are
smoking.
thinking about, and you know, people talking about using psychedelics or ayahuasca stopping people or feeling as though that shifts people's addiction, right? Like, is that actually changing things neurologically? Is that opening up different neural pathways? Does it genetically correct something? Like, where do we go in some sort of state of consciousness if we just like sitting in the optometrist chair when they click over the glasses and they go like, is it 1? Is it 2? Which one's clear?
Right.
Is it 2? Is it 3? It's like, what if that is what introducing some of these substances do?
Right.
You know what I mean? It's
Well,
almost like
there's, I mean,
just the click of which is clearer.
you're only one, not you, but a person is only a Google search away from all the research that has been done with psilocybin and depression and anxiety.
Absolutely.
And you got all the soccer moms fucking microdosing now, you know.
Oh my God, right? and obviously not necessarily doing so to understand the existential experience of like God and nothingness the way this movie is.
It's more like, oh my God,
can,
my husband stresses me out, so
and I'm
I
eating
need to
little bit of mushroom chocolate and like going to Whole Foods. Yeah.
Well, and it's weird because when
That's crazy
when
talk.
the words come out of your mouth, it sounds bad and like illegal or whatever, but like this shit is happening. Like,
yeah, and we
like
live in
there's
Colorado where like
the first
where this is the first, like, didn't Denver decriminalize psilocybin or
Yep.
yeah,
magic
which is
mushrooms.
which is incredible. And I know, I mean, obviously in Canada there's a ton of use of like ketamine and DMT therapies, and that's happening here. I mean, that happens. Yeah, ketamine
there's
therapy.
ketamine therapy right here in Colorado Springs.
Yep. Yeah, and it can be super helpful for folks with like chronic depression, persistent fucking PTSD, like. But again, this movie is an entirely different level of exploration into potential, I guess, and like energetic potential, because it asks you to step outside of a physical body if you're going back to genetics and sort of what we are in a petri dish, right? Like when you look at us under a microscope, what one drop of our blood looks like, or
right.
I
mean, there's
sliver
got to
of
be
our brain.
other universes, and that's what I've always thought. And I know Neil deGrasse Tyson like kiboshed this on an episode of Joe Rogan, but I've always thought like there's universes in our thumbnail, like it keeps sort of telescoping out, you know what I mean? But
well, isn't it possible? I mean, obviously,
I hope
universe.
so.
I mean, and on some level, universe, I would say, is subjective, but like because it's all about what your consciousness is, right? So, like, an ant has a sense of a universe that may be different than mine, or
Right.
maybe not, right?
Right.
But same as like we have little bugs that live on our eyelashes.
So there.
Do you know what I mean? They live an entire world that exists in our eyelashes.
I think on that same shit, Neil deGrasse Tyson was talking about a different dimension that is already existing. But for us to try to understand that, it would be like we were like an ant in a labyrinth that could only look forward or side to side, but like couldn't look up and see like all the
other possibilities,
or the giant scientist standing over the top of the. Like, wouldn't that be a fucking mind blow if you just like learned how to turn around the corner and you just saw like a giant hand reaching down to replace your food pellet or whatever, or like changing one store to another when you're not looking.
Yes, very much. That would be crazy. It is also interesting. I mean, obviously, altered states and states of consciousness, right? Is what if our consciousness also is part of the evolutionary process? So what he said, so obviously before he has the ability to speak in the same way, he describes his thoughts as more primitive as well, right? And so I suppose our consciousness may be evolving with our language, which is why they talk about potential future humans not even speaking, right? There being this sort of telepathy, because there's tons of research and reality that says that like our brains interact with each other, and our brains exist in relationship, trade information.
It's like when enough people start thinking about one thing, then there's all of a sudden like this advance in technology.
Well, and also
in like different parts of the world and shit.
Lest we forget, our brains identified themselves and named themselves. Our brains had consciousness around themselves to create a word for themselves. Itself, the self. Like, where else does any of that thought come from? That's your brain. Like, the brain created its own consciousness, right?
Well, I guess I guess a consciousness would develop. Like if we're thinking about like where would the need for like a consciousness or a self-awareness and understanding of what the fuck's going on. I guess it would be like instinct first as developed over
Time, sure.
evolution, years and years of time. Like you wake up, you die, or you know what I mean?
Right. You wake up, you look outside your cave. If there's a cheetah, you fucking hide. Right. Do you have fire? Do you have water? Right.
Well, and also, I mean, you ever seen like a group of dudes sitting around a campfire? Like they just like stare into the fire and they're all just like brain motoring, you know what I mean?
Well, I mean, there is definitely something about fire that
I think,
brings us all back to something very essential, right? And like
so,
we all get lost in it.
So once there was fire, there was like some sort of like reliable like safety or like you roll the boulder in front of the cave, you get the fire going,
right?
You're like, whew. We do not have to worry anymore about those motherfuckers outside this cave. So what now? You know what I mean? You just like look at this fire start to move and it's like, I wonder why that fire moves. I wonder why it's not like solid like a rock, or you know what I mean? Like that, and I think that that's kind of like what happened. And I think that that's sort of like when you flash forward to all this bullshit that's happening now, it's we've rolled the rock in front of the cave and now we're all just sort of looking at TikTok, and like
and just suffering from like the carbon monoxide because we forgot to like leave an air vent and like we just have like the
seems that way.
fire. But what I think is fascinating about that entire scenario is there was already a conscience. I mean, clearly it's an intrinsic sense of something, but you're already aware of like the boulder, those outside, the survival, right? And I think that's the piece that perhaps we're all trying to understand, right? Is where did we really come from in terms of being able to qualify this fucking experience of like neurons and synapses firing and blood pumping and organs moving and like all of that existing at once so that you don't just fucking drop dead.
It's pretty much always been whoever grunts the loudest. like you got like everybody's like,
huh?
What?
Yeah.
You know, like, well, okay, now what? And then somebody goes like, like this way, like this direction, you know what I mean?
I guess so.
And now it's like they're like, oh, we go this way because he seems to be self-assertive, you know what I mean?
Right. And like maybe there's safety if we go with this guy or we go with this person and
you can see how that evolves into like presidents and kings and all that shit, you know what I mean? Like it's whoever has the most ability to grunt, you know.
I get that, and mixed with this sort of like stifling of letting yourself exist in the unknown, right? Because the two sort of don't work together, right? So you can't follow the person with the loudest grunt unless you're like, I'm just going to follow this guy, right? Rather than versus sitting back and existing and thinking like, am I afraid? What am I afraid of? What do I think this person has to offer? And I know like in many regards, and certainly talking like politically at this point, like we don't really have the liberty to do that, right? Like
to do what?
To sit back and just imagine like all the infinite possibilities, because we're still a two-party system and right like we still have like rules and law and all that kind of good shit. But I just mean like
it would have to be some kind of mass awakening, some sort of big agreement that we're all just going to be happy. You know what I mean? And that's crazy talk.
What if that was really as simple as it could be? But again, like, doesn't that count? But isn't that counterintuitive? Or maybe it's not counterintuitive to capitalism. I mean, I think that they could go along with each other very well, but it's certainly the be all end all isn't going to be making money.
Right. Well, going back a few ticks to what you were saying earlier, Terrence McKenna seemed to think that our natural state was like sitting back, just being in awe of the universe. Like he seemed to think that that was like our natural state.
I mean,
and maybe there is something to like putting a disruptor to all the stimuli, for a few hours or so, you know.
I mean, I get that. Maybe because, you know, when you're younger, you're so much closer to potentially what that is, right? In theory, if you're somebody who thinks that you came before, or wherever a baby comes from universally, right? Like, I wonder if, you know, maybe you're tapped into a different or closer state of that, and we learn how to put up disruptors the older we get because we have to exist. And we have all sort of signed this social agreement to like train in a certain way to exist in this society and function the way that we need to and participate. And we get really upset when it doesn't go the way we think it's supposed to.
It's funny because like, I mean, I don't know. I guess I have a lot of like failure to launch tendencies, but like, I always had this sense of like, no, like I don't want to play, like I don't want to do that, like I don't want to play this game that like everybody is playing, you know what I mean? And then you just kind of have to sort of exist some way somehow, you know.
And again, just hope that you can just try and be kind and find your people and, you know, help as many as you can in a way that energetically makes sense to you, and whatever that looks like. But certainly living in whatever state it is, thinking that like the ultimate goal is like love and compassion, I think. So if you really do let yourself exist in like I'm just like a cosmic atom floating through whatever the fuck this goop is, then I also have to acknowledge that like the person next to me is also, as well.
Right.
And so as disruptive or offensive or loud or bullshitty or whatever the fuck they may be, they are still just another atom.
A snowflake.
Just another snowflake.
Floating in the wind.
And don't we all just want a little bit more love and compassion? Like,
I was just going to say, I honestly feel like most bad human behavior comes out of a feeling of either a mental defect or more commonly a feeling of not being loved or of not accepted, you know.
Sure.
And it's hard because how do you, and I didn't feel this way until you and I met, my baby. Like I thought I had in the past, but you know, I just, and you know, this relates to the end of the movie, but it's like when you find your soup snake or whatever you say, a lot of the questioning kind of falls away, and you can just like be, and then I think at where we're at in human time, you have to like be and do, because we haven't all agreed to just be yet.
Yeah.
And so like doing for just like, I already had the doing, which was music. Like I love to do music and shit. But it was sort of like aimed at this, like, I've got to
get this,
it. You know, I've got to understand the ultimate truth via music. You know, and I've got to find love or what I think, or what I now know is love through music. Does that make sense? Like through external validation, through applause, you know, just like all that kind of stuff, and
monetary shit, right?
Yep. You know, getting paid for your time, all that stuff. Which
certificates.
You still got to fucking get paid for your time. Which
of course,
I want to say to any young musicians out there, you got to get fucking paid.
Like, of course.
but having the love is sort of like a mental safety blanket for me, has allowed me to be and just do the music and not really be in any competition other than like spirited, healthy competition, which is both spirited and healthy. You know what I mean?
Well,
I'm just trying
that's
to say
so gross.
I'm just trying to say I love you so much, and
I love you
and
extremely.
you let me enjoy my life in a way that I've never been able to enjoy before all this shit.
My love.
You know.
I love you beyond, and I think it, I agree, and I think that fear is so much of what stops us from moving forward or letting love be the ultimate thing, right? Because ultimately, like, we all are just wanting to be loved, right? Like, even folks who I think are so ill or have some organic illness that just prevents, most ability for empathy or compassion, like, at the end of the day, there is a part of us that just would love that, like, like, all wanted our mothers to, like, hold us and feed us and keep us safe, right? Like,
Right.
and imagine if we all were able to, or at least as much as we could, take a deep breath and trust safety. But I think one of the things that this movie also elaborates, right, is that safety doesn't look the same for everybody, right? And in order to evolve in any sort of real way, there has to be like trust and safety, whether it's like physical trust and safety or emotional or whatever it is. But not everybody has that in a relationship, or even, ego gets in the way, right? And jealousy and feeling as though somehow there is a finite amount of love rather than expansive love. So
Right.
I can't be really proud of your success and also be successful. It's
Right.
like, wait a second. That's ludicrous. There's no finite amount of like support and accolades. And
Well,
I know it gets measured, obviously,
I think the
monetarily,
money,
but
I was going to say
but
the money piece.
energetically, there is no finite, right? And certainly
Exactly.
love or kindness, there's no,
I think that's why they say
it's not
money.
like you only have a certain amount of kindness and you got to like give a little bit to everybody, or one person gets a lot,
Do you think that's why they say money is the root of all evil? Because money cuts off the line between you and the realization that there's an exponential, is that the right word? Exponential amount of love?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe. I think we may have just figured it out. I always
Did we
knew.
solve racism?
We definitely solved something. We may have just broken all the banks, or 1%, something charging Wall Street. I don't know. I'll look it up in the New York Times. I'm not sure. I got confused. But I do. I agree. I also think that, again, like, money and power are not necessarily synonymous, but if
It's easy to think that if you don't know better.
Again, and in a society where like money and power are often equated, it's
Right.
hard to not see that. But there's also so much power in like individual expression and experience and community involvement and what you're doing in the little pieces around you, because I think that those ripples are become so big the more they expand out, right? Like a little pebble that just like falls into a body of water, like, creates ripples, and those ripples get bigger and bigger, and if there's another pebble, sometimes those ripples intersect, and
then you got Ashton Kutcher time traveling and
I
shit.
was gonna say, and then somehow we're in the Butterfly Effect, which, what a different movie. Although,
Yes, it is a different movie
and I was
than
gonna
the one
say,
we
not
just
The Fly, not Butterfly Effect, but I guess that's also a metaphysical one in some ways. But the idea of the butterfly's wings flapping.
You're a butterfly.
I've tried my best to be. I try to live my life like a flower, but I don't know. Perhaps I was a butterfly at one point. What this movie taught me is that anything is fucking possible, you know? And potentially there is some sort of genetic component or metaphysical, existential part of my stardust that combines with butterflies and the ethos and
especially now that you're
and David Bowie. We all are right? Stardust.
you're the dust coming off of your wings flapping is definitely interacting with other butterflies now that you are on Twitter.
That's true.
Katie tweeted for the first time today and she literally had I didn't know.
Yeah, my brain broke. But please check us out on Twitter at Milo and Milo Watch Movies.
No. On Twitter, it's just at Milo_watch.
Oh, right. Milo Watch.
Milo Watch. Action Milo Watch in the sky. Traffic reporting.
Coming to you from News Channel 5. Milo Watch.
Please take us, me and the audience, through your day tweeting.
So I obviously have been calling out into the void a little bit and just like shouting like, hey. So I'm an intelligent human and I'm an adult. I just had no idea that there was like really this much movement happening like this instantaneously
in a non-physical world.
And like I don't know what the fuck is wrong with me because everybody has a phone, so I don't know why I wouldn't be thinking that like as fast as people can type and their thoughts, and that's what Twitter is. And I just was like going about my life in like a semi 1996 to 2006 mentality, like, oh my God, let me send you this article that I read online, and like literally was like talking about getting a calendar with or not a calendar, a wall map of Colorado and like pins to like
so a little bit of backstory. I regressed. I have been trying to massage Katie into helping me and the band out with sort of online stuff or just, you know, kind of existing in that world to do managerial band stuff, but also just to sort of like check stuff out and see where we are actually at versus what the book that you read is saying that we are at. You know what I mean?
I'm hip. I'm young. I'm with it.
I'm with it.
I honestly like had a moment today of recognizing like, holy shit, like humans are just existing. I mean, you want to talk about fucking altered states? Like people are existing in this. I mean, obviously it's already a metaverse, but some sort of cyberverse and shouting into the void, but now it's not the void, but it's also all of us. It's really fascinating. I mean, again, I've only been on it for like a few hours and like I'm a clinical social worker and all this shit. So I'm like, what really is this? And also, holy shit, is this like how fast people's brains are moving, how scary life feels if like holy shit. When you can
kind of see everything.
And also when people are just sort of shouting at you without
or just like
consequence or fear or whatever's
just
happening.
Like unloading their fucking brain onto Twitter for no discernible reason.
Yeah, which I mean, I guess like, you know, not to say that we're so fucking benevolent, like we're watching movies and talking about them, enjoying each other's company, but like we're
definitely trying to get your money, folks. This is what this is all about.
This is what this is all about. Sponsor us and pay us. We love you. I don't know, feels different, but I guess isn't that also ego talking, right? Like thinking that what we have to say should be recorded and listened to. But for us, it's just like, I hope you enjoy it. I hope it's just interesting. And like, we'd love you to join us in our living room and talk to us about this movie. And, not really, but
well, I mean,
don't come to our house.
Well, my baby, I think that just about wraps it up.
Would you give this movie a thumbs up?
Yeah, I think this is like a top 10 movie for me. Like,
I
up there
think
with,
I would
like,
agree.
You know what's funny is like when I was younger, my top 10s were,
all the Ace Venturas.
of course, but no movies
Still
that I would hoist up usually had some sort of like stunning visual component, an element of psychedelia.
Sure.
But now that I'm realizing that a lot of these movies, the moral is like love at the end.
Yeah.
And I just love you so much, baby.
I love you, baby.
And that's why you go through all these life experiences in traveling and
right.
going to school, learning,
That's the hope, is
like,
just to be the best person you can.
Well,
and find somebody to fucking
to do it with, right?
Do it with, yeah.
To find a partner.
To find a partner who, in theory, you can grow alongside. And
I didn't mean to say to do it with. I think you all know
I
what I mean.
I'm trying to do it with you. Well, I guess that rounds it up, because we don't want to get sloppy on the on the mics, and I'm gonna fucking tongue kiss you hard.
I love you, baby.
I love you too, baby. Thanks
night.
for listening.